Penang, or Pulau Pinang, is an island state in peninsular Malaysia, commonly known as the Pearl of the Orient. The name Penang is derived from the Malay name Pulau Pinang, which means Island of the Areca Nut Palm. It lays in the Straits of Malacca, off the northwestern coast of West Peninsular Malaysia. The capital and main port of Pulau Pinang is Georgetown, which is located at the northeast. British colonization began in 1786. In 1826, the ports in Penang, Malacca and Singapore combined to form the Straits Settlements. On the 11th of August 1786, Captain Francis Light of the British East India Company landed in Penang and renamed it Prince of Wales Island in honor of the heir to the British throne. Muslims had actually settled in Penang long before the arrival of Captain Francis Light in 1786. The original prayer hall on the grounds of this mosque was built in 1734 by Haji Muhammad Saleh, a Muslim leader from Sumatra, Indonesia, who was also known as Admiral Intan Nam Tunku Patis Batang. He was responsible for pioneering the settlement of Batu Uban village, which was a transit point of that era for traders, explorers and Muslim missionaries from India, Pakistan and the Middle East. This mosque is a historical legacy and definite proof of the existence of the early Muslim community in this area. On the 7th of July 2008, Georgetown was formally inscribed and adorned as a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
We appreciate as Malaysian that Malacca and Penang has been classified as World Heritage for the first time.
Georgetown to date is about 223 years of age. Even so, this city is still being shadowed by the remnants of the British legacy. There are also several old buildings surrounding Georgetown which are classified as heritage. Shop houses and government buildings, for example, are still standing tall and preserved as the cultural heritage and tradition of Penang. Even though Penang is being enveloped by modernization and skyscrapers, this has not digressed its citizens from embracing its rich culture. Islam was the official practice for the Muslims in Penang. It has generated many mosques for religious purposes. The Kapitan Keling Mosque is one of the most reputable mosques in Georgetown for the Muslims of that time. It was constructed in 1800 and it was the first mosque ever built. There are also other religious homes worth mentioning, such as the Sri Maha Mariamman Temple. The temple is usually full of religious festivities. When the people from the district of Hokkien, China, first arrived to Penang, the main building that was erected in 1883 was a clan mansion. One of the famous clan mansions in Georgetown that is still standing today is the Yap Kongsi. It was built in 1924 on a 10,000 square foot piece of land and located at UNESCO's World Prime Heritage Footpath. St. George's Church is another historical landmark which is still very well preserved and impressive. This is the view of St. George's Church from the satellite. Located at the end of Fakuha Street and Masjid Kapitan Road, this church is definitely one of the main tourist attractions in Georgetown. Built in 1816, this church is influenced by the Georgian Palladian design. In fact, it is a combination of Georgian Palladian design and Grecian architecture style. It is derived from King George I and IV, who ruled from 1714 to 1830.
The Word became flesh and lived among us.
This prominent church got its name from a Christian patron, St. George. He was one of the most venerated saints amongst the Anglican, Eastern Orthodox, Oriental Orthodox, and Eastern Catholic churches.
Given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. The priest who was responsible for the building of this church was Reverend Robert Hutchings, who also founded the Penang Free School. He founded Penang Free School in 1816, 1 year before he started the building of this church.
St. George's Church is the first Anglican church in Georgetown, Penang, and it is also considered the first Anglican church in Southeast Asia. It's a very nice building. It has a lot of architectural elements that can be highlighted.
This church is designed by Captain Robert N. Smith, a British architect and established landscape designer.
Why did I choose this church for my research? Well, the church actually chose me. I had just finished working on Suffolk House, which is a building of virtually the same period of architecture, and I had found that journey so interesting, so fascinating, because it's not just about a piece of architectural history that I'm familiar with, the Georgian style, but about the people who built it, how they built on land that was swampy, how they brought the materials, how they created the bricks and the lime, and how they carved the shape of England out of materials quite different to the architecture and the buildings of England. They were being built out of stone, out of cast iron, all sorts of different things, but they were creating their England over here out of the materials local to it.
Oil paintings of St. George's Church that illustrate Penang at its beginning is still being displayed at the Penang Museum. The masterpieces from gifted artists like Captain Charles Henry Cazalet, Lieutenant Walford Thomas Bellairs, and John Turnbull Thompson exhibited images of St. George's Church at various stages of transformation. The architectural design of this church is inspired from the St. George Cathedral in Chennai, India. Similarly, it also depicted some Georgian Palladian characteristics.
From this photograph, it is not only symmetrical, but it has a very nice portico or front porch with classical columns.
Looking at the entrance, also known as portico, is a porch that leads the way to the entrance of the building. The extended structure, known as a colonnade, with a roof structure over a walkway, supported by columns or enclosed by walls, was designed to welcome the congregation and visitors to the church.
When the church was first built, it didn't look quite like this. The front porch particularly has been changed. These steps weren't in this position, they were further forward. And the whole of this floor was raised to the same level as the church. So from here to where you are, it was a raised platform. People would congregate after the service, they would chit-chat with their friends, and then they would disperse. But when they arrived in the pouring rain and their carriage was outside, they would get wet. So again, the congregation complained. And as a result, this was carved out, the steps were moved to here. So now that the carriages, the horses and carriages can come into an area, and now of course it's perfect for modern day use as well. This is where we have our coffee after service.
The entrance is made up of the portico and a staircase. The portico on both sides is supported by two Tuscan columns, with a pediment on the entablature without frieze. St. George's Church pilaster is a slightly projected column built into or applied to the face of a wall. Pilasters are the logical transformation of the column for the decoration of a wall. It may be defined as a flattened column, which has lost its three-dimensional and tactile value. The 28 pilasters applied on St. George's Church is an architectural element in classical architecture, used to give the appearance of a supporting column and to articulate an extent of the wall.
High door and of course high ceiling. From this picture, what we can see at the top part, it has series of balustrades. And it also has decorative elements on the top part of the wall.
A parapet is a wall-like barrier at the edge of a roof or structure. In military architecture, it is used for defense. With its unique design, the parapets with balustrades are designed to prevent unwanted falls from the roof and used to create a sense of harmony and aesthetic value.
This column, very high column, which has classical capital, shaft and a base. And you can see it in this photograph, it has mold arch with keystone in the middle.
The Tuscan series of two columns are laid on one big stone pile, constructed together side by side to form a repetitive series at the porch. The Tuscan is used as a support for the entablature, architrave, and the large pediment. In the Tuscan order, the columns have a simpler base and were inflated, while both capital and entablature were without adornments. A plain astragal ringed the column beneath its plain cap. This strong order was considered most appropriate in military architecture and in docks and warehouses, when they were dignified by architectural treatment. The columns were arranged symmetrically to show the balance in religious architecture and to emphasize the church's main entrance. Among the classical orders of architecture, The Tuscan order's place in the architectural canon was disputed. The order was only defined in the canon of classical architecture by Italian architectural theorists of the 16th century. The original roof was flat. However, in 1864, it was modified to a gable shape in order to withstand Penang's weather. The flat roof also caused leakages as it holds water when it rains.
Here we are on the roof of St. George's Church, and this roof has caused this church so many problems right from the beginning when it was built. In fact, within a very few years, the roof design had to be changed. But let's look first at the tower and the steeple. The steeple here is of cast iron, and the clock is 4 sides with a circle. The 3 sides were vents, and the front was the actual clock. And this clock shape was on the 4 sides of the steeple at one stage. And at some time in its history, it disappeared. The tower itself was built using a pile engine, which in 1816, 1817 was quite unusual to use, and it was operated by the convicts.
Indian labourers who were under the British East India Company authority were employed to undertake the construction of this building.
When Captain Robert Smith built, or was planning to build the church, he said he didn't want convict labour. He wanted experts, but the pile engine they could operate. So this tower here has got very, very good, strong foundations. We know they've got piles beneath them.
The cost for building this church was about 60,000 Spanish dollars. It was considered exorbitant, as the same amount was also paid to acquire Singapore a few years later.
But when I look back at the old paintings, here you can see the balustrades around it. They're just like the rest of the building. But when we look behind me, you'll see that it's just a solid wall. You see there's a balustrade similar to the one running around the building on the painting, but in fact it's been lowered and different urns have been built as well. And then soon after, it was changed to look like this. And even the small urns at either side are different from the original. Let's have a look at the rest of the roof, because this is where the first problems really lay. I'm standing now on top of the porch. And this is the triangular pediment. Below are sets of pairs of columns. Originally, this area here between the pediment and the tower was a flat roof directly above the porch. But years of leaking meant that a pitched roof was put in. But what they did is it covered over a hole which you'll see at the front, and that was completely open. And when that was open, you could see through to the tower. And we know that. This picture's 1915, but the earlier ones of 1867 which show the same thing. It's just this one is clearer. And there it shows